Yoko Ono,
Yeah,
somebody who would it be fair to say is pretty misunderstood generally? I feel like there's a lot
absolutely.
to her, you know?
Well, Yoko, if you look into what she's done, all of her artwork, all of her statements, all of her life has been dedicated to peace and communication. When she did her cut piece, that she became famous in the '60s, and we once saw her do it when she redid it in Paris. She sits on a stage all alone, wearing a dress and inviting members of the audience to come up one at a time and pick up a large pair of cloth shears. It's not a small scissors or anything. It's like a foot long scissors,
Right.
and to come up and approach her and to cut off a piece of her clothes,
Wow.
which is a very personal, a very dangerous, and to invite strangers to come at you with these double knife and really physically take off a piece of your clothing. And there's no music playing when it happens. It's deadly silent. It's extremely stressful because you have no idea what each person is going to do.
Hmm.
And yet, if you're going to trust people, if there's going to be peace in the world, we must trust people. And it takes that kind of trust to have peace in the world. And when you realize how dangerous it is, you realize how difficult it is to have peace in the world. And that Yoko is willing to open herself up to that, to strangers doing that, shows how committed she is to making that statement about peace.
Yeah.
It's very impressive. And all of her work has been about peace and communication. And so, like many other people who preach for peace, from Jesus to Gandhi, she's been attacked. I don't know why people attack people who ask for peace, but they seem to get very violent about it. You know?
Yeah. Well, it's a horrible thing, you know. I mean,
but I'm actually one of the few people in the world who've heard about Yoko before I heard about the Beatles.
Really?
The Beatles came out here in America in the winter of '64.
Okay.
But in the summer of '73, I read a magazine that was put out by Paul Krasner, a magazine called The Realist, which was basically an art political satire magazine. But they had an article in there about a Japanese woman who had rented a loft on Canal Street. And she had a lot of large black bags in there. And you could pay $5 to go into the loft. And back when $5 was more than it is today.
Okay, yeah.
But not more than $25 anyway. But you pay $5 to go in the loft, and you could get in a bag, or you could get in a bag with somebody, and you could do your thing, in the hippie language back then. Or you didn't have to get in a bag. You could come in and just watch the bags and wonder what people were doing in there.
Wow.
And that, to me, seemed like the strangest thing I had ever heard of, called art.
That is very strange.
And then there it was, 4 or 5 years later, there's John Lennon with this strange Japanese woman inside a black bag. And I thought, well, there's not two of them.
Wow. Holy smoke. So she was really active on the scene before the Beatles even.
Yes. Yeah. John met her at her one-woman art show at the Indica Gallery in England. And John, what's his name? I'm going a little blank. Anyway, the gallery owner knew the Beatles. He was kind of a hip guy. He knew the Beatles and the Stones. And he was the guy who said, John, I'd like to meet my friend Yoko Ono. And it was very unusual at that time, but still not that great for a woman to have a one-person show in galleries. But especially back then in the 60s, for a woman to have her own show was a big deal. So she was quite a name in the avant-garde world.
Yes.
But that is is way out of the mainstream.
Yeah.
It had to do, for instance, with destructive art, where people would smash a piano or smash a vase or something, and to relate the feeling of destruction. And Yoko she told me one time she couldn't afford a piano or a vase or something to break. So she was in a destructive art show, and what she did was play the telephone game, where a person whispers something to somebody else, and then they whisper it to the next person.
Right.
And she went through a whole audience of 500 people. And they're whispering all the way around. And it finally comes back to the last person coming up on stage and is about to say what they heard. And then everybody hears how different it is from what they thought they heard.
Right.
And Yoko put up her hand and said, I don't want to hear it. And she smashed and broke communication.
Oh, wow.
So rather than everybody watching somebody break an object, Yoko personally affected each person in the room by breaking their communication.
That's wild. Wowee.
So it cost nothing, and it was more effective than anything else anybody did.
Man, and it's intangible. That's insane.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. You know, I mean,
There's a lot of humor in Yoko's work that people don't know about. When John wrote, when he was doing interviews, he talked about Yoko. I think it's in an interview or one of her book forwards, where he said Yoko Ono is the most famous unknown artist in the world. Everybody knows who she is and nobody knows what she does.
Wow. That is.
Although in the last 20 years, she's had exhibitions around the world. She's always got 2 or 3 exhibitions going on in museums around the world nowadays, because she's become much more popular. The younger generations who didn't care who broke up the Beatles seem to like her art. They seem to understand what she's saying. And she didn't break up the Beatles. The Beatles
you don't give her that title.
Not at all. Not at all. I mean, if you ask the Beatles, they've all said no. It had to do with us as guys, that we reached the end of our working time together.
Even Paul said that.
Paul said it. George said it. Ringo said it a couple of times.
It's so true.
They don't care if John says it, but you know.